let's talk about toxicity and how to combat it. Now, I'm not only talking Smite in this regard, but obviously, as my channel is focused around Smite, this will be primarily on what you can do in Smite, and then on examples from other games and how that topic is approached there, and how that can be applied to Smite. Having a background in psychology, I'll also try to address some points that basically have an overlap with that field in regards to behavior and how that can be changed. To begin, I have recently been informed that in Smite itself, it is extremely important to write down in the report what actually happened, what certain persons that you are reporting did. That will drastically increase the chances of your report actually going through, as the support team knows what to look for, and if it can find that easily, it's much better than if you were to, for example, tilt and just write shit about how frustrated you are because that person is so bad or whatever. Those reports are not going to do anything in that regard, whereas those where you actually elaborate on what the problem was, what the player did, are very likely to be taken more serious. The other, obviously more temporary fix is always muting the person that's harassing you while in game. I've often experienced that people are actually just pissed off about a certain scenario in the game, and if you mute them for a while, they will actually calm down and you can actually go back to normal communication as soon as the game is going a little more in their favor. But if you join in on their raging or try to speak against them in any sort of form or defend yourself, all hope is basically lost. They're gonna keep on raging, they're gonna go deeper and deeper into that circle of just being more pissed off about you answering in a way that they're not hoping for you to answer or not wanting you to answer, and they're just gonna basically lose the game by arguing the very moment that happens. So you're much better off just muting them, moving on, maybe unmuting them 10 minutes later if you think they may have stopped, which can sometimes be the case, and if it's not, just mute them again. So that's the steps you can take at the moment, and that's pretty much it. But there are more things that have been tried out by other companies, and there are more things that I think HiRez could apply as well. Let's start with what League of Legends does. Now, League of Legends has tried out various things throughout the years in order to combat toxicity and harassment in various ways. The statistics they have found out are that actually only 5% of all cases of harassment come from people who just tend to harass on a daily basis just because they want to, and those are only 1 to 2% of the player base. Whereas 95% of all toxic comments and such are from the average person who just has a bad day and is usually not like that. This is interesting and worth keeping in mind, as this kind of implies that many people will just have a few reports and therefore never see any punishments, as long as the punishment is based on numbers, as they only do it very rarely. So which measures did Riot, the company behind League of Legends, take? They started out with in-game tips. They gave tips about negative outcomes of harassment, basically saying if you bully your teammates, they're probably going to play worse, and that in red letters. And they did the opposite by saying if you don't bully your teammates, your team will probably play better, in blue letters. And this had a slight impact on the harassment statistically. Not that huge, but it changed a little bit about the behavior of some players. And though it was just a very tiny change, it was also very easy to implement. It was just some in-game tips, some messages popping up at certain loading streams and stuff like that. Then they introduced reform cards, which basically tell the player that was banned for something why he was banned, which part of his behavior led to being banned. So it didn't explain in detail what he did, but it showed, well, you've been harassing other people, something like that. And I don't know, maybe in some instance even some examples, some quotes out of the chat. In both cases, we're talking about things that are trying to trigger some form of encouragement or disencouragement. Disencouragement when it comes to the reform cards or the in-game tips, which basically give you negative outcomes or negative responses to your behavior, and the positive outcomes from the blue tips obviously showing the opposite of when a rewarding behavior will bring you benefits. It has been proven in psychology over and over that this kind of thing works very well, but a problem with it is that feedback of any sort needs to come fast to actually cause a good reaction. And this is what Riot found out as well. They needed to find a system that was faster. The reform cards came usually around 2 weeks after the player was banned, So at that point, he had almost forgotten what he had done. Because of that, Riot tried to figure out new methods, one of them being an automatic instant feedback system. This system, when somebody got reported for harassment, for example, would scan through that person's messages, and if there were many offensive words, harmful words, whatever, then the person would get banned pretty much immediately and get their reform card in that very second. Another approach that was taken was the Tribunal, which didn't really work all too well, where players were the ones to vote on somebody being banned or not and getting rewards if they voted the correct choice that the majority voted for. However, the problem here was that everyone just always voted for ban just to get the rewards, and pretty much everyone who got reported in that time got banned, which was a little awkward as some behaviors were really not that harmful to warrant the ban. League of Legends has also introduced a system where you only have limited messages after toxicity attempts. So you were only allowed to write, for example, 3 messages per game. So you really had to limit yourself to important messages. And if you used them for harassment, you had no other way to call anything important for the game. So people would be restricted in that sort. Dota 2 did something similar where they just completely banned out communication for those players, which was not often regarded as that great because you just couldn't communicate with that person at all, leading to a worse team fight potential, for example. Another, or the last thing that I will talk about that League of Legends did was a placebo report for being bad, for playing bad. So you could report a player for playing badly and write at whatever you wanted and pour all your anger into that and basically get rid of your frustration, but the report wouldn't actually do anything. It wouldn't actually go anywhere, and most people didn't know about that at first, but it eventually turned out that those reports were going void. And I think this is something that is really easy to implement and will just really help with getting rid of a lot of those useless reports, while obviously not playing the player, but telling the player base that those reports just go void and don't actually hold any value. While League of Legends had a mix of reward systems and punishment systems, and I think that's a very good solution. You should always try and reward good behavior and punish bad behavior, such as Smite does with a goodwill system, only that the goodwill system hardly does anything for you. In Dota 2, things are a little different. If a player fucks up, if a player disconnects too often or harasses people too often, they drop into low priority queue. League of Legends has considered doing that as well, but they were kind of against it for various reasons. Namely, that it exposes the players to even more negativity, and a lot of players quit in that queue, and obviously they don't want to lose customers. So, yeah, there are some points against this, but Dota 2 still pulled through with it. And I will actually read out what the low priority queue exactly means, because it's quite heavy. So, players in low priority will have longer than normal queue times. Only play matches with other players in low priority. Not receive any item drops. I guess those are like cosmetics or something. Cause all players in his or her party to enter low priority queue until they leave the party. They do not share the item drop penalty, but they still end up in that queue. Only be able to queue for unranked single draft. Low priority games have to be won in order to count. So if you lose, bad luck. Not receive trophy points. Once again, I don't know exactly what that is, but whatever. And you can get out of low priority queue by winning a game. And if you get down there again, then you have to win 2 games. And if you get down there again, you have to go in 3 games, and this goes up to 5 games. And if you then fail to stay in a game and still disconnect or harass again, you're gonna get banned for 24 hours. So, from what I've heard about this low priority queue, it is hell. You do not want to end up there because you're surrounded by people you do not want to play the game with. People who don't understand the game, people who basically hate the game and you don't even know why they're playing it, people who hate you, and you're just really happy to be out of there again. This is a very good deterrent, once again, psychological aspect here. This is a punishment system. It takes so much away from you that you really want to avoid it. And as such, it is very potent, but it also comes with the obvious downsides. Not everyone, you're gonna have people exposed to more toxicity, leading to them even being more toxic, or will have people quitting. in my opinion, it's not a bad thing to have a few toxic players quitting, but hey, whatever. So that's some options right there. And then there's one that Overwatch applied, Blizzard has applied, which I find hilarious and a very interesting approach, as it is not so much about punishment, but rather entertaining. So this is just an experiment by Blizzard so far, and I could imagine it expanding. What happens is if you write GG ads in Overwatch, you'll get a randomized message where you basically either wish the enemy team a good day or insult yourself for having a small ego or whatever. Stuff like that. So you can't actually write GG ads at the end of the game, but you will instead write one of those funny messages without having any control of it. I think this is really cool. I think the messages are really funny, and now you actually see people typing GGS just to send one of those random messages instead of sending a normal endgame message. I think this is great. I think this could be applied for a lot more things. Obviously not for GG, but ads as itself doesn't really, it's never meant in a nice way if you see it on an end screen and stuff like that. I imagine that this will be expanded by Blizzard, and I would love to see that in other games as well. And then there is one particular last one for Smite itself. So in Smite, you have the mute option, and Smite obviously has VGS. And VGS is great, and it is a tool that would allow for a player to be muted in chat, but still communicate for teamfights and such. Now it's important that there are some VGS commands that are mostly about being a dick. Unless you're really nice, but the majority of people doesn't actually use it that way. So what I would propose is creating a partial mute. This would mute, I've pointed this idea before, by the way. This is not the first time I'm saying this, so you may have heard this before. I really still think it is such a good thing to have. So you'll have a mute where the player cannot write anything, which is not that important in Smite as long as you have the VGS, and they can only use VGS commands crucial to the game. They can use defend commands, attack commands, incoming commands, behind us, blah, 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 all of that stuff. They cannot use nice job, you rock, cancel that. Maybe they can actually use cancel that, but everything that's just about being nice to someone or indirectly being a dick to someone, I am the greatest, all that stuff, unnecessary, awesome, woohoo, all of that can be abused the moment someone dies and you're just like, woohoo, 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 you died. So just stick to the ones that are actually important for knowing how to progress in the game, for communicating with your team in terms of what we're going to do next, and you're fine. You would not have to deal with that stuff anymore. And I think that is a very, very solid approach to get rid of a lot of the negativity that you have in Smite. Now, I'm not saying Smite is full of toxic people. I know there are plenty of nice people in Smite, and I think that the report measures taken at the moment are going through relatively quick, surprisingly quick actually, and you get a lot of feedbacks for reports you've done. You get an action has been taken report very, very often if you fill out your reports properly, but you need to do that first. And obviously, I think there are more messages, more options that would just encourage being positive in the first place and discourage being an asshole. That's the end of today's video. I hope this topic was interesting for you guys. Thank you for watching. New video tomorrow. Duke Sloth, out.